Greetings, Math 10 students. This is the second part of our video on simple interest for section 3.8. If you haven't checked out the first part of the 3.8 simple interest video, you might want to do that before watching this one. Also, this video is not going to cover compound interest at all. This is for use with week 5, which only deals with simple interest. Alright, so in the last video we talked about how simple interest works and how the interest is based on the principal, rate, and time. And the formula that we had was interest is equal to principal, rate, and time. In both the examples that we saw, we had to solve for the interest. In some cases you might be asked for the principal, rate, or the time. Let's take a look at how to solve those questions. We're going to take a look at an example with Michelle, who invested $8,000 in a money market account for 3 years, and she earned $420 interest. So you could say she invested $8,000. At the end of the 3 years, she had $8,420 in the account. And she wants to know what was her rate. This is what's commonly called the APY, or annual percentage yield, on an investment. And it's not always going to be the same as the listed interest rate for that account for various reasons. One of those reasons is compounding. That's the primary reason. But she wants to know how good an investment was this. What was the rate that she got? They'll usually tell you that for most accounts, but sometimes you'll invest in something that's, say, based on stocks. If you're investing in funds that are based on stocks and the rate could go up and down over time, you don't necessarily know what rate you're going to get ahead of time. You don't necessarily know the rate of return. Well, how do you compute that? There's other situations where you might be interested in finding the principal or the time. So let's take a look at this example and see how we can solve for one of those pieces. First couple steps are the same. You're going to identify the interest, principal, rate, and time. That's always your first part of the process for these questions. Now, this is a little bit different because they actually told me the amount of interest. It says right here, it's $420. So $420 interest is what she earned, and my principal is always the original amount invested. I forgot to mention this last video, but sometimes people get confused and they see the I for invest and they think that that's the I down here. Totally different. This I down here stands for interest, not invested. So be careful. The amount that you invest or borrow is typically the P, the principal. So that's going to be the $8,000. And we don't know the rate. They're asking what was her rate. The other giveaway is that there's no percentage in this problem, and the rate's got to be a percent. So that's my unknown, and I'm going to just leave it with the variable r, like we did with the other word problems. And last but not least, they do tell me the time is 3 years. So my step 2 for these is typically to convert percent to decimal. Well, I don't have a percent. I just am missing that, so I can skip that step. And then time, if they give you months, you do have to convert that to years by dividing by 12 or making it a fraction over 12. Again, thankfully they already gave me years, so I don't have to do that. And then the third step is to use the formula. Same formula as before. I equals P times R times T. Your interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. Well, what's the difference here is I actually do have a number for the interest that I can use. I can plug in the 420 directly underneath my I. Then I'll bring down my equal sign, and then directly beneath my P, I can write the 8,000. But directly beneath my R, I don't have anything to write. Again, just like the previous word problems, resist the temptation to leave that blank. Actually write the letter R in directly below the R. And then below the letter T, I can write the 3 years. Should look something like this. Make sure that you understand where I got this formula from, and make sure that you're comfortable actually writing that letter R right there. That's a variable. It's an unknown value, and we want to have that in our equation because that's what tells us how to solve. Now, if you go back to your notes from week 4, or go back and watch the videos from week 4, you'll recognize this as the same type of equation really that we saw in week 4. This one's going to require 2 steps because there's 2 numbers on the same side as the variable. But I've got a lot more flexibility here because there's a lot of possible steps that I could take first. So I do want to separate this left and right where the equal sign is to make sure that I'm paying attention to the 2 sides of the equation separately. And it looks like I'm trying to solve for the variable r here. So I want to cancel out the numbers on the same side as r. Well, we saw last week that if there's an addition or subtraction, you want to get rid of that first, but everything's multiplication, so anything's fair game. You want to cancel out the numbers on the same side as r, but you can do them in either order. You can cancel out the 3 first if you want, or you can cancel the 8,000 out first if you want. Don't worry about the 420. He's off on the left minding his own business. He is not on the same side as R, so just leave him right there. A third option, which some people like to do, is to multiply the 8,000 times the 3 because they're together on the same side of the equal sign. There's something called the commutative property of multiplication that lets you do that. If you really like that, go ahead and do it. If you don't, that's okay. Don't have to worry about that at all. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out the numbers on the side with R separately. Either way, it's going to be 2 steps. You're either going to have to do that multiplication first, bring everything down, and then divide, or you're going to just divide twice. Both are the same amount of work. So I'm going to cancel out the 3 first. I'm going to take this 3 and cancel it out by doing a divide by 3. And I have to do it on both sides. So I'm going to do a divide by 3 on the left as well. Remember, when you're solving equations, you want to do the opposite operation. And since everything is multiplication here, you're going to pretty much be canceling with division. So 3 divided by 3 cancels out, and on the left, 420 divided by 3 gives me 140. I bring down my 8,000, and I also bring down the R. So I still have 8,000 times R on the right-hand side. Still one number to cancel out on the side with R. So again, I look on the side with my variable, the R, and I've got to cancel out that 8,000. That's over there with the R. To cancel out a times 8,000, you got it. Divide by 8,000, and you're going to do it on both sides of the equation. So divided by 8,000 over here, 8,000 divided by 8,000 just cancels out. Now 140 divided by 8,000 looks awkward, and it's going to give you a decimal. That's okay. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. Go ahead and do the division. It might look like an ugly decimal because 8,000 doesn't go into 140, but resist the temptation to reverse the order of division. Always divide top to bottom, no matter how awkward it looks. And that's going to give me 0.0175 as my answer for R. But that's perfectly okay because my rate is supposed to be a percent. So my final step, if I'm solving for the rate, I convert it to a decimal by moving the decimal point once, twice to the right, and it becomes 1.75% as her rate on that. Her APY is the annual percentage yield, is what the financial institutions will typically refer that to, but you can think about it as what her simple interest rate would be were it simple interest. Now, money market accounts typically aren't simple interest, but this is actually what it would feel like if it were a simple interest account to her. Solving for principal and solving for time are essentially the same process as this. It's just you're solving for one of the variables on the right-hand side, so you have to divide to cancel. So to summarize, when you're doing simple interest questions that ask you to solve for the principal, the rate, or the time, you're going to end up using the same process as the ones that asked you to solve for the interest, but once you get to step 3, you're going to have an equation to solve. To solve that equation, it's typically going to take 2 steps. One simple way to do it is to just divide by the numbers on the side with your variable, one at a time on both sides of the equation until you get your final answer. And as a last reminder, if you're ever solving for a rate at the very end of the problem, you typically have to change that decimal back to a percent.